Key up the intro.
The proper perspective.
Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective.
The proper perspective.
So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. All right, what's going on, everybody? This is the Proper Perspective podcast. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. Came across this news article and I'm like, yo, this is crazy. So I figured I'd get up here and make a comment about it. Now, you probably already heard about the controversy going on with Netflix and Jada Pinkett when she did, or when they, they just released the Cleopatra piece, movie series thing on Cleopatra. Now, that's a bit controversial. I wasn't gonna say too much about that. There's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on with that as to whether or not Cleopatra could be black African, dark skinned. I was gonna try to stay away from that. I wasn't gonna speak on that, and I'm still really not gonna speak on that. But what I'm speaking on today really is, so aside from that controversy, and there's plenty of people talking about it, I'm scrolling through different news articles, and I come across this article about Egypt once again. So that's what this is really about. So it appears that the crazy Egyptologist Zawi Hawass, it seems as though he may have struck again. Now, it may not be him, so maybe I shouldn't say that, or allegedly, but it really sounds like something that he would do. It seems now Egypt is the government of Egypt has gone one step further, and now they are revoking or eliminating or banning archaeologists. If you are an archaeologist in Egypt and you discover something, and in any way, shape, form, you feel as an archaeologist that the discovery points to the idea that there may have been some black people in ancient Egypt, you might be in trouble. You might end up losing your right to be an archaeologist, or at least to be an archaeologist in Egypt. Egypt has banned a Dutch archaeologist or a Dutch archaeological team because they have an exhibit on display that superficially connects black people, particularly black musicians, with the history, the legacy, the greatness of ancient Egypt. And so because this archaeological team and their museum, because they make a connection between black musicians, particularly African American musicians, but black musicians, regardless of what country your ancestral slave boat stopped at, black musicians who find themselves inspired by the history and the legacy of ancient Egypt. Because this is really what this is about. This archaeological team is not necessarily saying that ancient Egypt was a black civilization. No, this archaeological team is simply saying that there are black musicians. There have always been black musicians Some particularly, again, they put a little more focus on African American musicians. They speak about Beyonce, they speak about Rihanna, they speak about Miles Davis, and other hip hop artists. So their museum display shows a connection between Black American musicians being inspired by ancient Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian religion, ancient Egyptian ideologies. And so what the government of Egypt is saying, you are no longer welcome in our country. You are no longer welcome to perform the archaeological work, the research, the digging. We don't want you touching anything in this country. Now, this is not a new it's not a new archaeological company or research team. It's a company, it's a team that has been doing archaeological work for 30, 40 years. So they've been there for a good long time. Whatever they find it, report it, and they begin working on figuring out, what does this mean? How does this relate to the overall knowledge base of what ancient Egypt is, who ancient Egyptians are. So they have a very strong and long track record. And now, simply because they're saying African Americans are inspired by ancient Egypt, the government of Egypt, or the governmental agency in charge of antiquities, is saying, I got to go. So I'm like, I'm gonna share my screen. So you know I'm not making this up. So I'm gonna share my screen and show you the article. So here we go with the article. As you can see, this is the BBC. Egypt bans Dutch archaeologists over exhibit about black musicians. And this is just coming out. This is just 5 years ago. So here we go. You see the picture on they're using a picture of Beyonce, who wore a Nefertiti inspired costume. So this Dutch museum says its archaeologists have been banned from carrying out excavations at a key Egyptian site over an exhibition exploring the influence of ancient Egypt on black musicians. That's literally what they're doing. They are simply saying black musicians have found inspiration from ancient Egyptian history. And because black American musicians, or black musicians, I'm not going to just put that on the black Americans, black musicians, this is enough to get your entire archaeological team banned from the country of Egypt. Just for you saying black musicians find inspiration. Now, if this does not reek of racism, if this does not reek of anti-black ideology, then what, pray tell, would be proof? The National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden said Egyptian authorities had accused it of falsifying history through its showcase of work by artists including Beyonce, Nas, and Miles Davis. So the mere fact that they have a museum, that they have in their museum a display that says artists like Beyonce, artists like Nas, artists like Miles Davis have drawn inspiration from information about ancient Egypt, that's enough to be banned from the country. That's enough to be told, you don't know what you're talking about. That's enough for the Egyptian officials, who have not commented, to say, to take steps to ensure that you are no longer allowed to work in this country. So that's, again, you know what I'm saying, I'm showing, this is the article. I'm not going to read throughout the whole article. Again, it's off the fervor of the Netflix documentary on Cleopatra. Me again, personally, I'm not weighing in on whether or not Cleopatra was black. I don't know enough to say anything definitive. From what I've seen, it honestly looks like there isn't enough information to make the claim that she is black. But I haven't done that kind of research, and I'm not gonna stake my reputation on a yes or a no. But it's very interesting that now, because the documentary is out, now the Egyptian government is trying to clamp down on anything and everything that is even connected to ancient Egypt being black. They're trying to get rid of an entire team just because they have a display that says Black Americans are influenced. The sheer lunacy of this, knowing full well that thousands upon thousands of African Americans alone go to Egypt yearly. Some, quite a few go to Egypt on an individual basis, and globs upon globs of African Americans go to Egypt, visit Egypt in groups, in large groups, led by a lot of times led by other African Americans. So like they're essentially, I guess what they're trying to do is shoot themselves in the foot, because that's a decent amount of tourism dollars that they're basically saying, we don't want your money. If you got anything, if you're inspired by ancient Egypt and you're black, stay the hell out. If you believe that ancient Egypt might have had black people in its civilization, stay the hell out. Let alone if you think ancient Egypt might have been entirely black. If you think that, stay the hell out twice. So again, this is just, this is a short piece I'm doing. I'm scrolling through the article. Erykah Badu wearing a ring featuring a winged Egyptian goddess. So again, that's just another picture that they have. The exhibition at the National Museum of Antiquities entitled Kemet, Egypt, Hip Hop, Jazz, Soul, and Funk aims to demonstrate how ancient Egypt and Nubia have been an undeniable source of inspiration for musicians of African descent for over 70 years. So again, there are people in Egypt, there are governmental agencies run by people in Egypt who are so hostile towards Africa as a whole and people of African descent that including Nubia into the exhibit makes them hostile. And discussing Kemet and Nubia as it pertains not to historical legacy of dark-skinned or black people in that land, but as it pertains to dark-skinned or black people, people of African descent, finding inspiration to help create music. These people in the governmental agencies are trying to eliminate and disassociate and shut down any connections. It's almost as if they could, they would simply uproot the entire country and move it somewhere else on the map so that it is no longer on the African continent. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So again, what I'm saying is, or rather, just to show you, anybody that might think, oh, you just making that up. Okay. I showed the news article. That was one. You can see it. BBC, CNN, it's all over the place. I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit of this news report also. And then I'm going to come back to make another point. So you can see
Netherlands, a museum exhibition on how ancient Egypt has influenced modern black musicians displayed black American singers and other performers as Egyptian pharaohs and queens. This attracted strong criticism from Egyptian authorities. Egyptian officials were offended and banned Dutch archaeologists from the country. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities wrote to this museum to
So as you can see, and just to make, or hopefully you can see, and try to blow it up a little bit. Egypt bans Dutch archaeologists after museum cast Beyonce as Queen Nefertiti. So first they mad about showing Cleopatra as black. And like I said, okay, I might let that slide because that's a little, there's some sketchiness, there's some gray area with who exactly is Cleopatra. Now they mad that Beyonce dressed up as Nefertiti. Now, I know why they mad about Nefertiti. Because they're clinging to a fake, they're clinging to this idea of a bust that they want to, they always try to preserve this bust, and they always hold this bust out as the best example of what Nefertiti looks like. But now, you may know what it looks like. I'll show you in a minute. The funny thing is that particular bust has already been shown and proved to be a fake. And so that's what they really mad about, because Nefertiti, it's very difficult to try to make the argument that Nefertiti does not look like a black woman. Theoretically, we can get into these debates that will go on for hours if you want to say, well, what is black and what is a black woman and all this other stuff. But for the most part, at least in the USA, if you are aware of not the biological ideology, but if you are aware of the social construct of what race is, then you fully know what a black person is, what a black woman is, what black people look like. And Queen Nefertiti looks like, if you pulled her out of history and dropped her in the streets of the USA, you would be calling her a black woman. So now they're mad at Beyonce for dressing up as Queen Nefertiti. According to the Times, the accusations of falsifying history and adopting an Afrocentric approach, they are always on this kick. They are always trying to malign legitimate research. Afrocentricity is not a racist ideology. It is not a fake ideology. It is not a false ideology. It is a legitimate ideology that seeks to explore the heritage, the legacy, the history, the culture of Africans, both on and off the continent, in all of its grandeur, in all of its even if we go into depravity, everything there is to be studied about a people, Afrocentricity is up for the task. But there is this constant push from certain other ideological corners of the universe, dare I say white supremacy, where they constantly try to malign and castigate Afrocentricity. And a lot of this is because it is Afrocentricity that was at the foundation of the Cultural Revolution, that saw, like, a lot of people, like, if you've heard the expression Christopher Columbus discovered America, because that's something that's always taught in the U.S. And it's always been an idea that was taught without challenge. So now, if you come up in a time when you started to hear people challenging that, and you start to hear people saying, well, how could Christopher Columbus discover America when people are already here? Excellent point. Great point. what people may not realize is it's Afrocentricity that created that response. It is Afrocentric scholars that pushed back against that racist ideological statement or teaching. It was the Afrocentric scholars that said, no, hold on. We got to set the record straight. We're going to have to talk about this Christopher Columbus thing. It's Afrocentric scholars that gave the first push. It's Afrocentric scholars that said, wait a minute, you said George Washington was a man of honor and truth. It was Afrocentric scholars that said, but what about the enslaved Africans that he abused? What about the enslaved Africans that he yanked out the teeth of in order to replace his own? It's Afrocentricity that has been at the forefront at lifting up the veil to uncover truths that either were not known at all or were not being spoken of. So this is why there is always this constant push to turn Afrocentricity into the bad guy or the evil ideology or the racist reverse racism ideology. So again, you got these Egyptian officials trying to help the cause of maligning Afrocentricity, even in places where it doesn't even belong, because you cannot say that Afrocentricity is what causes Beyonce to take a look at Nefertiti or Nas to take a look at ancient Egypt. That's not necessarily Afrocentricity at all. But because they want to malign Afrocentricity, they take every opportunity to throw shade at the approach, at the ideological approach, at the archaeological approach, at anything that dares say Africans and or black people were involved in anything related to civilization, especially in the ancient times. Now, kudos to the Dutch Museum for pushing back against this idiocy. Let's see. So I'll go ahead and keep playing the review.
Weeks ago, accusing it of falsifying history and Afrocentrism. The museum has called out the move, saying Egypt has long been studied primarily as part of the Mediterranean region. But many musicians with African roots emphasize that ancient Egypt is an African culture. Beyoncé, one of the most well-known African singers in the world, was heavily criticized for her outfit.
Now, as you see on the screen, it's about to disappear, but they throw up the question, who was Queen Nefertiti?
The singer dressed up as the Egyptian queen Nefertiti at the Coachella Festival in 2018.
So again, it's 2023. They airing their grievances. They're taking this opportunity to air a grievance in 2023 about an outfit she wore 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But again, now you see, here comes that fake bus, and I'll show you why it's a fake bus, or how I know it's a fake bus.
Let's tell you a little about Queen Nefertiti, also known as the Lady of All Women. She was the chief consort of the pharaoh Akhenaten, a king who played a prominent role in the cult of the sun god known as the Aton. To put it simply, Nefertiti played a crucial role and had ties with the national god. Experts say that the museum should say that the event was not on Egyptian culture, but it was about African musicians.
So again, the censorship is just it's like it's foaming. They're foaming at the mouth with this censorship idea. They're gonna tell the archaeologists who are in charge of the museum and in charge of the display, you shouldn't say anything about Egyptian culture. Just say it's about Black Americans or Black musicians. The censorship it's ridiculous. But I'm going back to the whole point why they are so incensed. They are always trying to deny the fact that their there is a black population in Egypt. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and say that the entire country, the entire land of Kemet, the entire land of Egypt is entirely a black population. And while there may be some people who say that, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is it is incontrovertible that there are black people who currently live in that land and that have always lived in that land. And I'll go further to say quite a number of the most influential people in the history of ancient Egypt belong to the quote unquote black population. I'm not saying all, I'm not saying every pharaoh was a black pharaoh, but I will say there are more pharaohs in the history of ancient Egypt that were black than just the Cushitic dynasty. They like to try and act as if the Cushitic dynasty is the only time there were black pharaohs ruling in ancient Kemet, and that is not the truth. Now, again, I'm not saying every pharaoh was black, but there were more black pharaohs than just one dynasty that came from Kush. Now, I will say again, this whole the thing that they're doing with Nefertiti, it's already been shown and proven that this bust is fake. So what I'm gonna do is come up out of this screen, and yeah, my screen is still being shared. So there's a scholar by the name of Legrand H. Clegg. Now, back in 2018, he penned this article where he talks about it. And I'll show you the picture. That if you're in the know, if you've been studying stuff about ancient Egypt, then you're probably already aware of this. If you haven't, then cool. But you see these three pictures here. These are pictures of archaeological discoveries. And this is why they're so bent out of shape about it. Because before these images were found, all we had was that bust. Once these images were found, they had no choice but to reconsider what they were calling, or who they were calling Nefertiti. So let's see, nationwide during the first week of February. Again, this is an older article. Black History Month, NBC's Today Show aired an exclusive program entitled "A Tomb to Remember." First look at a bust of King Tut's mother. It featured Josh Gates, the host of the Travel Channel's Expedition Unknown. He had traveled to Egypt, and there in an underground tomb revealed what he and other scientists believe is the mummy of the 18th dynasty Queen Nefertiti, wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten and mother of King Tutankhamun. Amid orchestrated fanfare, a reconstructed bust of the famous queen's skull, designed by sculptress Elizabeth Daines, was unveiled on the show. The queen is depicted as white. Now, this is a scholar, and this is Legrand H. Clegg. He's a scholar of antiquity. He's a scholar of ancient Egypt. And so for him, he knows, he's fully aware of what's the reality and what's the false narrative that's being pushed. So when he sees it, he's incensed. And this is the other picture that they try to run with. Now, all across America, black people saw the program of outrage at yet another example of white scientists, artists, and journalists distorting black history. Queen Nefertiti was a black African, and there is compelling evidence to prove this. But before we do so, here's a bit of a background. Now, to try to sum it up, the background, let me go to this other site. There was a book that was published. It was primarily published in French. Another reason why sometimes the information doesn't really get out to the whole world, so to speak, or definitely doesn't get out to the U.S. It's published in French. So we're an English speaking country, so we don't have privy to a lot of French text.
But let me see if we can visit over to Wikipedia and we find out the French language book Le Bus de Nefertiti, un imposteur de l'Egyptologie, and I know I'm butchering that. The Bust of Nefertiti, a Fraud in Egyptology, a book by a Swiss art historian named Henry Sterling, and another book, Missing Link in Archaeology, by a Berlin author and historian, Edrogen Ersevan. Both claim that the bust was a modern fake. Sterling claims that Borchardt may have created the bust to test ancient pigments, and that when the bust was admired by Prince Johann George of Saxony, Borchardt pretended it was genuine to avoid offending the prince. Sterling argues that the missing left eye of the bust would have been a sign of disrespect in ancient Egypt, and no scientific records of the bust appear until 11 years after its supposed discovery. And while the paint pigments are ancient, the inner limestone core has never been dated. Ersevan suggests that Borchardt's wife was the model for the bust, and both authors argue that it was not revealed to the public until 1924 because it was a fake. Now, I ain't gonna deal with this other theory about Hitler, but so as you see, now again, now should we rest all our laurels on Wikipedia? Absolutely not. But again, you can see, for one, I'll say one thing that is validated off from the Wikipedia site is that it is an actual book. So it's not something that's just entirely made up. It is an actual book. You can purchase it from Amazon. Here's another news article that discusses, this one is in French, so that's not going to do us any good. This is another news article that discusses the Swiss art historian. They're saying that the bust is less than 100 years old. Let's see. And basically the same story about it being a fraud and it being created and the artist being too afraid to tell the prince, the Prussian prince, that it wasn't authentic, so he just figured he'd keep his mouth shut. We're going to go back to the article by Legrand H. Clegg, just to give a quick breakdown. What do the facts really tell us? First, ancient Egypt was in Africa. Second, the natives of ancient Egypt referred to their country as Kemet, land of the blacks, or the black land. In addition to this, ancient Egyptian language was African. It was not Indo-European. It's not Semitic. It's not Afro-Asiatic. The hieroglyphic images and symbols employed by the ancient Egyptians are native African in origin. The royal mummies are generally African and have high melanin levels consistent with black people. The blood type and physical remains of the general population are consistent with other Nile Valley Africans. The culture of the ancient Egyptians, their religion, family structure, social organization, their cosmogony, etc., is typically African. Moreover, ancient Hebrew, Greek, and Roman eyewitnesses overwhelmingly describe the ancient Egyptians as black people. Now, that last point cannot be stressed enough. I believe it's about 12 different non-African, i.e. non-black, historians who were eyewitnesses in the land of Kemet. And all of them came back to say, hey, those people over there are dark-skinned, wide-nosed, thick-lipped, woolly-haired people. Now, when you add all of that together, that's a black person. As far as the stereotypical image of what we as black people are. So for instance, I can't say I fit all of those descriptors. I don't even have hair. So I don't have woolly hair. But I still fit into the general scheme of what a black person would be. All of these ancient historians who traveled to Egypt said the same thing. So the idea that modern day scientists can say, well, that's open for debate. It's not open for debate when people who were there actually tell you. If I come and tell you the person that robbed me was white, it's not up for debate. When you say, well, we don't necessarily know if he was white or not. If I tell you the person that robbed me was Hispanic, well, we don't necessarily know if the person was Hispanic or not. I'm the eyewitness. I saw who did it. So when eyewitnesses, and I'm not talking about people who, I'm not talking about historians of no merit. I'm talking about the same historians that they push down our throat as perfect examples of intellect. You know, they make a big to-do about Herodotus. But they never tell us that Herodotus says that the people in ancient Egypt are black. Then when we find out that Herodotus said the people in Egypt were black, then they say, well, we don't know if Herodotus was telling the truth. Well, you knew he was telling the truth before we read the page you didn't give us. You never said anything about Herodotus being unbelievable until we read the book you didn't tell us the book to read. If you told us to read book 1, but in book 7, he said the ancient Egyptians were black, you ain't want us to read book 7. You just said stay in book 1. Soon as we get to book 7, now Herodotus is not believable. Yeah, okay. Enough with that. So as I go on, Queen Nefertiti and her son, this is still again the article. They were born into Egypt's 18th dynasty. Egypt at that time was far and away the greatest land on earth. Hint, hint. It was a nation so opulent, so awesome, so powerful that her neighbors and subjects declared that gold was as plentiful as dust on her streets. The pharaohs and queens of this dynasty built lavish temples and magnificent obelisks and extended their sovereignty around the Mediterranean world and deep into the interior of Africa. This line of rulers was one of the most renowned royal families in human history. I wonder why they don't want us to connect to that part of the history. If genetic and sculptural evidence clearly shows that this family was of black origin. This was proven in 2012. In January of that year, DNA Tribes R Digest published the results of their examination of the mummies of King Tut, his mother, father, paternal grandparents, and paternal great-grandparents. The findings indicated that when compared to various populations around the world today, these mummies have an overwhelming genetic relationship to the people of Southern Africa, the African Great Lakes, and tropical West Africa. In the case of Nefertiti, 82% of her genetic markers match current populations of 4 regions in sub-Saharan Africa, while 96% of King Tut's genetic markers match the same populations. The populations of sub-Saharan Africa are overwhelmingly black. That's pretty much case closed. Now back to this light-skinned bust of Queen Nefertiti. As I already said, the historian who wrote the book tells you it was a fake. He tells you who commissioned it, who was the model for the image, and he tells you why the artist never spoke up. He was too afraid to tell the truth because he was going to embarrass the Prussian prince. So all I'm saying is, okay, yeah, I started off saying what an interesting discovery. Excuse the pun. The officials of Egypt are trying to ban yet more information that connects black people to ancient Egypt. If you don't know by now, I would say go on over to this screen. Yeah, I'm still sharing my screen. So if you could go to change.org, I implore you. Now, I didn't set this petition up, but I implore you to go to change.org and sign this petition to have the University of Pennsylvania recall Dr. Zahi Hawass's doctorate. Now, I say that because Dr. Zahi Hawass has been the leading Egyptian official who tries to disassociate anything black from ancient Egypt. Every chance he gets, he tries to malign Afrocentricity. And he tries, his basic idea is there is absolutely nothing African about ancient Egypt. And he goes even further because you can have a healthy debate as to whether or not something African is the same as saying something black. But he goes further. He says both. He says ancient Egypt has nothing to do with Africa, and he says ancient Egypt has nothing to do with black people or anything of a black ethnicity. So he is entirely against anything, every chance he gets, anytime there's a discovery, if the discovery has anything to do to prove or suggest that anybody in ancient Egypt was black, he pops up to say, no, it doesn't. And for that, there is a strong push among some circles. And so what I'm doing, I'm just doing my part to try to help further put the word out there. There's been people talking that he should, at the very least, the University of Pennsylvania should recall his PhD because he is acting irresponsible as a PhD holder. There are certain standards that every position in life, every position in people's careers comes with standards, and you are expected to uphold those standards. He is not upholding the standards of a PhD scholar. He is actually being and doing a disservice to the field of archaeology, to the field of Egyptology, and so on. He is a blatant racist. So I'm saying I signed the petition. If you agree with me, sign the petition. I'll leave the link in the chat. And with that, I'm gonna break out. This is the Proper Perspective Podcast, Proper Perspective Pod class, dropping a little knowledge for you. Hit the like button, subscribe for more, leave a comment, and stay tuned for the next episode.
The Proper Perspective. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective.
The proper perspective.
So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective.